This wonderful operatic voice belongs to a proto-deacon Dmitry Vengersky from the Svyatogorsky monastery in Donetsk, an industrial center in eastern Ukraine controlled by Russia since 2014 and annexed in 2022. This is basically one of the Ukrainian Orthodox churches declaring excommunication of the head of another Ukrainian Orthodox church. So how many Orthodox churches are in Ukraine, and which one is the right one? This is a very complex question, especially since the events of 2014 and the start of the war in 2022. Historically, both in Imperial Russia and in the Soviet Union, Ukraine was one of the most religiously diverse regions, and her diversity was predominantly represented by different Christian communities: Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant. When it comes to the Orthodox Church, since 1686 and until the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was a metropolia of the Moscow Patriarchate. In the 1990s, Ukraine launched decommunization and de-Russification, which eventually resulted in multiple Orthodox churches, all claiming to represent the Orthodox faithful of the country. The key figure in independent Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine has been Filaret Denisenko. It is him being anathematized at the beginning of this video. At 96, he is still an important religious leader and the head of one of the Orthodox churches, yet unrecognized by the rest of the world. See a video about him on my channel. One of the most important Soviet bishops, after the death of Patriarch Pimen, Filaret became one of the candidates for the position of the Patriarch himself. After losing to Alexei II, he decided to get autocephaly for his metropolia in Ukraine. He could not achieve full independence from Moscow, but he managed to gain significant autonomy for the Ukrainian Church. Basically, the Church was free to elect her own bishops, including the Metropolitan of Kiev, but needed a formal blessing from the Moscow Patriarch, commemorated him in the liturgy, and retained the name of Moscow Patriarchate. I will talk about this church more later. Filaret's ambitions and power struggles eventually conflicted with the vision of the Moscow Patriarchate, and he was suspended in ministry, downgraded to a simple monk, and in 1997 excommunicated from the church. Even before this power struggle, the number of nationalistic clergy and laymen significantly grew. They didn't want the church in independent Ukraine to be controlled by Moscow and saw the opportunity to have a national church free from Russian control and influence. When they split from the Church of Moscow Patriarchate, they supported dethroned Filaret and eventually joined his newly founded Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate. However, due to Filaret's autocratic style and ambitions, the nationalistic groups soon left his church and joined the Ukrainian autocephalous Orthodox Church. Ukraine faced the situation of three major Orthodox churches, to say nothing about the smaller marginal ones. The Church of the Moscow Patriarchate claimed canonical authenticity, yet the other two saw the situation when the biggest church of an independent Ukraine is a subject of the neighboring country with a long traumatic history of colonization and occupation as unacceptable. The administration of President Petro Poroshenko and some key bishops attempted to normalize the situation and unify Orthodox churches. In 2018, they called a council in Kiev under the chairmanship of the Metropolitan Emmanuel, an official representative of the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Constantinople. The Church of Moscow Patriarchate refused to participate, claiming her canonical status. The Kievan Patriarchate and Autocephalous Church eventually declared a unified Orthodox Church of Ukraine and elected a Metropolitan Epiphany as her head. In 2019, Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople granted the Church the status of autocephaly, hence declaring it a canonical Ukrainian Church. The Church of the Moscow Patriarchate and naturally the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow did not recognize the decision and suspended their fellowship with the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Filaret also didn't join the Unified Church and kept the unrecognized Kievan Patriarchate. Hence, ultimately the unification attempt failed, although the participants of the council claimed success. The new Orthodox Church of Ukraine embraced many parishes, clergy and laymen all over Ukraine and was declared canonical by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. However, this was rejected by the Church of Moscow Patriarchate and a large portion of Filaret's Kievan Patriarchate. Nowadays, there are two churches claiming canonical status, and the world, including Christians outside of Eastern Orthodoxy, is split over the support of one of them. As for Filaret and his church, it is not recognized by any Orthodox church worldwide. However, church adherence is significant. At some point, it even reached about 45% of Orthodox believers in Ukraine. Filaret himself has played an important role in Ukrainian politics and was even awarded a Hero of Ukraine in 2019. But what about common Orthodox believers around Ukraine? Have they been involved in these battles over political influence and canonicity? Up until 2014, when direct Russian involvement in Ukrainian politics became too obvious to ignore, most laymen chose which church to attend for simple practical reasons. They went to the one that served in their preferred language, Ukrainian or Russian, to the priest they liked, to the parish their family belonged to historically, or simply the closest one to their home. After the start of the conflict with Russia in 2014, and especially the annexation of Crimea, the Church of Moscow Patriarchate started distancing herself from Russia. Metropolitan Onufriy, a permanent member of the Holy Synod in Moscow, stopped participating. For many Ukrainians, belonging to the church became a sign of support and association with Russia, although this church is primarily Ukrainian. Nevertheless, after the start of the war in 2022, most of the church condemned it, and the process of alienation from Moscow somewhat accelerated. The church no longer uses the affiliation with Moscow, and the patriarch is no longer commemorated, except for some rebellious, occupied, or openly pro-Russian parishes. However, many experts argue that Metropolitan Onufriy is hesitant to move on with the separation for several reasons. First, since the Unification Council of 2018, the Ukrainian state formally recognizes the Orthodox Church of Ukraine as the canonical one. If the Church of Moscow Patriarchate breaks up with Russia completely, she will be all alone, unrecognized and isolated. Currently, there is a vocal support even from the current political establishment in the United States. However, this support is based on the assumption that the church is canonical, and this canonicity is based on the affiliation with Moscow. Second, the church suffers from both heavy Russian shelling and military action, and persecution from the Ukrainian state for the suspicion of espionage or lobbying Russian interests. Further escalation will not make the position of the church any better. Moreover, the faithful are split between many different potential directions the church could go, namely furthering the isolation, shifting towards Russia, trying to negotiate with the authorities, or contesting the canonical status with the unified church. The last option seems the least plausible, yet there are many people inside and outside the church for whom it is critically important. Why is canonicity so important? Many critics of different Ukrainian churches and even the Russian Orthodox Church ask the big question: why do people stay in the wrong church? If the patriarch of your church supports the unjust war, if the leadership of your church has fallen to heresy, or if your church is losing popularity, why don't you just change your church. This is not as easy as it sounds. The Orthodox theology is very deep and complex. When it comes to ecclesiology, your church is not a club, team, workplace, or residence. You cannot just change it out of convenience, even if it is in a very poor state. Consider a family. Even if the father drinks, beats his wife, and abuses children, leaving your family is a great trauma and loss in and of itself. The church is considered as something even bigger than a family. Ultimately, it is the body of Christ. The canonical church is the only place with authentic apostolic succession, an uninterrupted chain of ordinations from the apostles, where you can partake of holy sacraments and hence practice your Orthodox Christian faith. No bishop is considered sinless. Any of them can fall to heresy or commit great sins. And since there could be only one canonical bishop per eparchy, which is only one canonical church in one country, there is no changing of the church without moving abroad or falling to heresy. Please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. I see you all next time.